We are back with the latest on the situation in Sudan, which is embroiled in a violent power struggle that has left at least 185 people dead.
The battle in Sudan rages on. Mediation efforts and ceasefires have so far failed. Fighting in Sudan between forces loyal to two generals is threatening to turn into a prolonged conflict.
The U.S. has warned Sudan of further isolation if it agrees to host a Russian base.
Weeks of power struggles.
Heavy fighting continues for a fourth straight day in the capital, Khartoum, this morning.
Hiding in plain sight to avoid U.S. sanctions and keep the financial pipeline flowing back to Moscow and its war on Ukraine.
If we really want to understand the current conflict in Sudan, we have to travel back to 1955. Let's go a little further. Let's go to 1898. You see, the best way to understand whatever thing that is happening today is to travel back in history to go and check the roots of those things. And the farther you can go back in history, the clearer or the better you will understand whatever you see happening right now. So I think because of that, let us start from 14th century. In the 14th century, an Islamic missionary named Ghulam Allah bin Adi, which I probably did not pronounce well, traveled from Yemen to northern Sudan and settled down in a small town called Dangola. The objective of this Islamic missionary was to convert people in the northern Sudan to Islam. In the 15th century, another Islamic cleric by the name Ahmad Abu Danana, which again I probably do not pronounce well, traveled to the northern Sudan with similar objective to convert people into Islam. 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, 19th century saw a very huge inflow of several Islamic missionaries coming from the Islamic world into the northern Sudan. By the beginning of the 20th century, this is what you see in Sudan. The northern Sudan dominated by Islam and the southern Sudan dominated by Christianity. And that leads us to the very first problem. But before I go to that problem, I need to tell you about how the United States came into Sudan, which again, it will probably not make sense until I tell you about the Britain first. Britain colonized Sudan in 1898, and up until 1956, the British governed Sudan. And do not forget the religious problem I have told you earlier. Because of that problem, British tried to administer the two parts of the country separately. So they made sure that the northern part of the Sudan was being governed by people from the north, and the same thing from the south. However, by 1944-1945, the people from the north put pressure on the British government to allow the two parts of the country to kind of like being governed together. In 1946, British gave in to that pressure, and the implication of that is suddenly most of the position in Sudan was being held by people from the north. Another part of this story, which I have not told you, is that the north is responsible for the 2/3 of the entire population of the Sudan. For example, the 1970 population of Sudan is this. And among this number, it is only 3 million that belong to the south. Because the north dominated the affairs of the people in the south, the entire country started speaking their official language, became Arabic. And this is very difficult to believe, but it is true. They created Sharia law to govern everybody in Sudan, not just the Muslim, including Christian. And that, my friend, was the origin of most disasters you will hear today about Sudan, because that led us to the first civil war in that country. August 18, 1955, the very first civil war began in Sudan. This, in the history of Africa, was the first time children soldiers were going to be used in a war. For 17 years, hundreds of thousands of people were killed. To be specific, 500,000 people. And on March 27, 1972, the two factions involved in the battle, agreed to stop the war. However, 11 years later, in 1983, the second civil war in Sudan began. The reason why I'm telling you the stories of this, Islamic religion, first civil war, second civil war, is because I want you to see, how that crisis began till present day. So here we are. During the first and the second civil war in Sudan, this country was supported by different other countries. Because think about this, war is very expensive. There are only few countries in the world that can run civil war more than a year, except the parties involved in this war is receiving weapons from external power. In the case of Sudan, between 1955 and late 1980s, a fraction in the country was taking their weapon from United States, while another fraction was taking their weapon from Soviet Union. According to this Human Rights Watch publication, the United States alone spent about $1 billion providing arms to the northern side of the battle during this civil war. While Soviet Union, in the same publication, Soviet Union spent $12 billion supplying weapons through Ethiopia to the southern part of Sudan. Okay, by now you have seen something, and what hopefully you have seen is a country that is now polluted with arms. The implication of that is you have these different rebel groups having a whole lot of weapons in their hand, which means if at any time these people think they deserve something or they want to get something and they cannot get it, they are having tons and tons of weapons which they have gotten from United States. United Kingdom, I did not tell you, was part of the supply of ammunition to the country, and Soviet Union. And that, my friend, is one of the reasons why this country hardly ever experienced peace. I think one important question you may want to ask is, what is America fighting for in Sudan, and what is Soviet Union fighting for? Well, a few things actually. First, Sudan happened to be rich in gold and many other natural resources. Second, the country is strategically located very close to the Red Sea, River Nile, and superpowers have always loved to be the one influencing what is going on in such country. Anyway, I did not tell you that Sudan is by land the largest country in Africa. So there are a few things to fight for when you talk about the soul of Sudan. However, up until now, you have never seen Ukraine in the picture. So, let's talk about how Ukraine comes into the picture of the current conflict in Sudan. February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Needless to say, Ukraine is the precious child of the West, so the West needed to save their own child. But think about this, saving Ukraine from the hand of Russia was not going to be something as simple as, if America was dealing with one of the weak countries in the world, like Syria, like Iraq, or like any African country, what they would do next is to storm that country and kill their leader. Those bastards killed many of our leaders doing that. Gaddafi is a perfect example now. But you cannot storm a country that has nuclear weapon and say you want to kill their leader just like that. So what is America going to do to save their precious child from the hand of this, by the way, another criminal? Yeah, we have to start with sanction.
We will limit Russia's ability to do business in dollars, euros, pounds, and yen.
What that means is that the U.S. can restrict other countries from selling any product to Russia that includes a piece made in the U.S., and that includes technology.
The United States announced additional sanctions against Moscow and more support for Kyiv.
Western nations have announced fresh sanctions against Moscow.
The economic sanctions leveled against Russia by the U.S. and its allies are the harshest ever handed down.
Sanctioning Russia as a country is not going to do the entire job. So we have to go a step further by sanctioning the rich, the billionaires, the oligarchs in Russia.
All right, let's get back to some of that breaking news for you that came out of the UK and the US just moments ago on Russian sanctions. The US is now sanctioning the central bank governor, her number two as well, the deputy prime minister.
Today, the White House announced new sanctions against members of the Russian elite and their companies.
This is a concentrated effort from the U.S. They're devoting considerable resources toward seizing and freezing the assets of these oligarchs.
Part of our support is to impose further costs on Russia for its illegal and unjustifiable actions. We are announcing new sanctions on 129 individuals and 63 entities, including Russian deputy prime ministers, ministers, other members of the office of the President of Russia, members of the Russian military, and those involved in the production of artillery and weapons used in Ukraine.
With 3,126 sanctions against Russia and its billionaires, Russia was definitely in a very tight corner. But the United States knew that Russia could still find a way to at least manage these, restrictions by working with other countries. It is at this point, United States started to threaten other countries of the world that may want to work or have business relationship with Russia.
It looks like the U.S. is putting on guard anyone that deals with Russia politically or economically, potentially a path, or the strongest we've heard yet, to secondary sanctions.
The US warns India. Why? Because India is buying discounted oil from Russia, and that to the US seems like India is trying to circumvent American sanctions.
The US has further warned African countries against working with the Wagner Group, saying that such an association will not help Africa end up in a stronger position.
US Deputy NSA has cautioned India over trade with Russia. On his visit to India, Deputy NSA Dalip Singh said there will be consequences for any country, including India, that conducts local transactions through Russia's central bank.
And that leads us to Sudan. You see, as US tries to make every other country in the world to understand that it is dangerous to help Russia Helping Russia means you are sponsoring war in Ukraine. Now, if you help Russia, there will be consequence. As United States try to get other countries of the world to understand this, Sudan was actually working perfectly well with Russia, but they made it a secret. That secret, however, came to an end in July of 2022.
We traveled 200 miles north from the capital Khartoum to Gold Country to take a closer look at Wagner's main moneymaker.
In July of 2022, CNN went as undercover to Sudan to go and investigate what Russia was doing in that country.
We verified their location with coordinates provided by Sudanese anti-corruption investigators and head there to see for ourselves. As we approach, the red flag of the former Soviet Union blows in the wind. A Russian tanker sits next to it. That's convenient. They've just confirmed the Russians are at this location.
CNN investigation discovered that Sudan and Russia were working together in perfect secrecy. In fact, Russia was making as much as $13 billion every year, including 2022 in Sudan.
That's around $13.4 billion worth of gold a year that's being stolen from Sudan.
If at this point in the story you have not seen the problem, let me show you. By giving $13 billion to Russia at the time when Russia need money to buy weapons to destroy Ukraine, what Sudan is doing is telling the West that we are part of the Ukraine war.
Wagner hiding in plain sight to avoid US sanctions and keep the financial pipeline flowing back to Moscow and its war on Ukraine.
If you think America is going to be happy for that, then you are mistaken. Two months after it had come to public that in fact Sudan was financing Ukraine war on behalf of Russia, United States, again a public news, find out that Russia was planning to have a navy base on the Red Sea, that is the Red Sea that belonged to Sudan.
Regarding the agreement on the establishment of a logistical support point for the Russian Federation Navy, it has been signed and is in the process of ratification, as you know.
So what exactly does the new pact entail? Russia will set up a naval base in Sudan. It could base up to 300 Russian troops at this base and get hosting rights for its nuclear warships. In return, Moscow will supply the insurgency-torn nation with weapons.
Russia needed this Red Sea as a base because that increases its influence in Africa, especially in that zone, which, by the way, was very close to the north, and you're talking about Arab world and all of that. Okay, so think about this. Increasing Russia influence in that region automatically means reducing America influence. And if you know a single thing about America, you will know that if you are a country that is giving Putin $13 billion a year to destroy Ukraine, and the same country is trying to reduce America's influence while increasing Russia's influence, by now you are probably signing up to whatever comes as a result of your decision. Which, by the way, don't think I am making this up, because immediately United States got to know about the second news, the US ambassador to Sudan went on record as saying Sudan should be expecting the consequence of their actions.
The US has warned Sudan of further isolation if it agrees to host a Russian base. In fact, here's what the American ambassador to Sudan, John Godfrey, said last September. I quote, All countries have a sovereign right to decide which other countries to partner with, but these choices have consequences, of course.
On February 28, 2023, the Arab News reported that the very first warship that belongs to Russia has landed in Sudan. And guess what? Just 5 weeks after this day, the ongoing conflict in Sudan started. If this is the first time you are seeing my video, you are very much likely to perceive that I hate America. And yeah, that is probably true. But you are also very likely to think I am pro-Russia. In fact, I have seen some comments on my previous video where some people are saying I am pro-China or pro-Russia, where that is not accurate. The only pro I am is pro-Africa, because I'm an African. And come to think of it, Africa is the only victim here. All these bastards from the west and the south, or wherever they come from, we come to Africa. They will want to steal our resources, and because of that, they will create a war that ought not to be. And as a result of this war, hundreds of thousands of our citizens, millions of our citizens will be killed.
Violence erupted in Khartoum a week ago.
Many of our properties, many of the infrastructure that we have will be destroyed with this war. Our economy will be set back in another 2 decades or another 3 decades. At the end of the day, Russia will go home with our gold. America will go home with our oil. We will suffer the consequence of the war 20, 30, 40, 50 years later. That is provided they do not start another war before we recover from that. So at the end of the day, we are the victims. United States, Russia, China. I have no reason to be pro of any of these three, because what does Africa benefit from supporting any of these people?